November 15th. I'm Mitch Perry, senior political reporter for the Florida Phoenix, joined as I am every week at this time, my two colleagues, Ray Roa, the editor-in-chief for Creative Loafing newspaper, and Ben Montgomery, the author and independent reporter. Today, guys, good morning.
Good morning, Mitch.
Good morning, Mitch. How's it going?
Good. And Ray, we're going to lose you halfway through the show because you're going to be going on a panel discussion in an hour.
We're going to get roasted at Tampa Tiger Bay.
We're going to talk about the election and what happened there. So can you give us any hints about what you're going to be talking about?
You know, I think the best thing about Tiger Bay is you don't ever really know what the members are going to ask. It's like the wildest, pretty smartest room, you know? So I'm pretty nervous, I think.
I'm sure you're going to be awesome. Okay, so it is actually 10 days now. It seems like much longer than that since the election, of course. And, you know, especially a lot of the Democrats I meet, say they're on a news diet. They're all so bummed out about the results that they're deliberately avoiding the news or they're switching to become an NPA voter and leaving X to go to Blue Sky. We'll talk later in the show with a former Florida member of the Democratic National Committee who did, in fact, go NPA earlier this year before the election. But first, let's talk about something else here. Talk about earlier this summer, of course, our long regional saga that has been the quest for the Tampa Bay Rays to get a new home finally seemed to be over after both the St. Peter City Council and the Pinellas County Commission agreed to spend considerable taxpayer resources for a new deal at the Tropicana Field site to build a new stadium right next door, despite pleas by critics who were hoping the region could get a better deal for those taxpayers. The county agreed to fund $312.5 million and the city $287.5 million, plus an additional $130 million on infrastructure near the ballpark. So that's all over, right? Well, maybe not. Since that time, of course, we've had a couple hurricanes, Helene and Milton, come through town, absolutely devastating significant amounts of property in Pinellas County and specifically St. Petersburg. And there's been a lot of discussion about that commitment as both the City Council and the County Commission now need to approve the bonds to pay for that commitment. And in fact, in the county, there's also been a changing of the guard at the County Commission level where the county voted 5-2 to spend those funds for the Rays earlier this year. But after last week's election, there's been a change, as we said. There's two newly elected county commissioners, two Republicans, Chris Schur and Vincent Nowicki, who could theoretically team up with the two people who voted against the deal earlier, Commissioners Dave Edgars and Chris Latvala. And one of those new commissioners, Vincent Nowicki, is here with us in studio this morning. Hi, Vince. Good morning. Welcome to The Skinny.
Hey, good morning, Mitch. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to talking about the stadium and other issues.
All right, and congratulations. We used to say you beat you slayed Charlie Justice, who was a beloved figure in town after 12 years in the county commission. So, yeah, we'll talk about maybe some other things going on at the county commission level as well. And also, I believe joining us, is that correct? No, we don't have Rod Diner yet. Okay, so we're hoping to get Rod Diner from the group. What is it? It used to be called
No Home Run.
Yeah, now it's called Home Runs Matter.
Yeah,
they've changed the title there. Formerly known as No Home Run, who some listeners might remember when we had a big debate about the stadium before the vote came in the summertime. That group, now known as Home Runs Matter, it was very prominent in speaking out against the deal. They thought it was not a good deal. So hopefully we can make sure that Tom, who I know is actually overseas in Spain and was hoping to get it via Zoom. So hopefully we'll get him. Okay, Vince, but let's talk about this, of course. So I guess the county actually, there was going to be a vote on this earlier, I believe, and then it got delayed, right?
Correct.
Yeah. And technically you have months, I believe, up until March 31st for both the City Council and the County Commission to vote on the bonds. So where are you on this issue?
I'm a no.
You're definitely a no?
Definitely a no.
Wow. And so do we know, we didn't reach out to Chris Schur yet, so we don't know where he's at on this. And by the way, we should tell listeners, by the way, if you want to call in and talk about this, let's open the phones up here in a minute, 813-239-9663. Why are you a no?
For lots of reasons. I campaigned on this issue for the last year and a half, and I won the election. So elections clearly have consequences. So if I represent all of the city of St. Petersburg at the county commission, and so all of the residents, my future constituents that I talk to, think this is a really bad deal for the residents and taxpayers of the city of St. Pete. And if City Hall isn't going to give good government to their residents and look out for the taxpayers, I think it's incumbent upon me and the county commission to give good government to those city residents that are getting neglected and really bent over the table by the Rays.
And of course, a lot of we've had these storms. Let's talk about that, because maybe I think there are some folks, and I don't know. This was controversial, no question about it, when the council approved this several months ago. But man, St. Pete is not the same city anymore, and neither is Pinellas County in many ways. In terms of estimates of over 10,000 people no longer living where they were a couple of months ago before Helene and Milton hit. So
that's just in the city.
Yeah.
I mean, countywide. I mean, you're looking at 40, 50,000.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Is that many people?
Correct.
Wow, that's incredible. So right, this region has been severely affected by these storms, and I know, and I see this on social media every day, because we've got this new factor now, right? Milton knocked out, of course, the roof of Tropicana Field, and we had this report that came in I think it was this week, the official report, which says this is going to be, $56 million
right,
to fix this roof if the city decides to do it. Repairs to the roof alone will run at over $23.5 million. But the whole report, this is a 412-page report of the city commission that came out. All the details came out. And that is significant. And I know a lot of people are saying, wait, does that make sense? The city to spend that much money for a ballpark that theoretically is only going to be around for a couple more years before you get the construction, maybe, of this new stadium. And also, as we just heard beforehand, right? So theoretically, now the Rays made news yesterday, of course. They're now going to play in Steinbrenner Field in Tampa. Wait, by the way, what do you think about that? Because there are a couple of minor league ballparks in Pinellas County that I think people were hoping maybe they might play. We're talking about Clearwater, where the Phillies play,
right,
Dunedin, where the Blue Jays play.
Tampa Bay Times reports that Clearwater's Baycare Ballpark was the home of the Philadelphia Phillies, the other most workable option, but it wasn't given much consideration by the team.
9,000 something capacity, I think there.
Vince, what as a Pinellas County Commissioner, or about to be, what do you think about
that? So again, for me, I was always not liking the deal for the stadium and the development aspect for the city of St. Petersburg. And so for me, almost whether if they agreed to play in Clearwater, if they agreed to play in my backyard, I still probably would have been against the deal. But what really irritates me, and I hope the Rays show up to the county commission meeting on Tuesday. I know they're supposed to be formally invited. They talked about in the workshop yesterday for the commission to invite the Rays to come and talk Tuesday. So I'd love to ask them why they felt compelled to pay the Yankees $15 million to play at Steinbrenner Field for 1 year, but yet they're only going to pay the county commission $1 million a year to build them a new stadium. And they're paying nothing to the city of St. Pete for revenue share, naming rights, nothing. So they're going to pay the Yankees $15 million for 1 year, but think it's okay to bend over the county and the city over the table and pay them $1 million. It would take us 15 years to get that same $15 million that they're going to pay the Yankees 1 year. That's not a good partnership to me.
Now, Vince, I know that the Rays until recently had been very quiet about all this. Everybody was kind of wondering what the heck was going on. And I know that maybe you're not really keen on them. The fact is that the team gave money to a political committee that gave it to another committee that ran attack ads against you and for other candidates who were it gave money to candidates who supported the stadium deal.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, again, they could have, given me money and played both sides of the table or both sides of the fence. But still, why people voted for me is because I challenge the status quo. I'm just not going to rubber stamp whatever initiative, whatever lobbyist, whatever special interest is coming in to get. I'm not a rubber stamp. I swim upstream. I have my own mind. I'm a free thinker, and I represent conservatives, fiscal conservatives in St. Petersburg and Pinellas County.
On that note, it's going to be a long road to see whether or not you can get that money back for the county. Have you been in contact with anyone? Do you have any ideas for what you would do with that money? Is housing on the table, things like that? What would you do instead?
Yeah, so the history of Tropicana Field, the Thunderdome, whatever was called before that, was always to bring people and economic development to the city and the county. It was never originally about a baseball team. And so I think people forget that, that back in the 70s, it was trying to do something to spark development and spark growth in the area. And then it's been kind of diluted a little bit that it's always been about baseball. Well, that's not the case. So we can use bed tax dollars or TDC dollars to build a convention center, to acquire land for a convention center, and to fund a convention bureau. So I've talked about throughout the campaign to have a 1 million square foot convention center, which if we're talking about real economic development, we could probably get, private funding for that, because you can track, hey, how many people you're going to have, hotel rooms. And so that would have a much bigger economic impact than the worst attended Major League Baseball team.
Second worst.
The second worst attendance in Major League Baseball history. So
again, if you're just tuning in right now, you listen to Skinny. It's 11:16 in the morning here. We're speaking with Vincent Nowicki. He is a newly elected Pinellas County Commissioner, Republican, who defeated Charlie Justice last week. I think Monday you're going to be sworn in, right?
Monday, 6:00.
Okay, very exciting. And then Tuesday you've got this vote. And again, the topic here is the Tampa Bay Rays Stadium. And maybe some of you are saying, wait a minute, we're talking about that. I thought that was a done deal. And again, maybe not. And the fact is here, again, a couple factors here. One of them is that the bonds have not been issued. We're talking about $312 million from the county. The city council, by the way, is going to meet next week and have the same discussion, I think, later in the week, next Thursday, I believe it was. And of course, we're living in a different world now than we were 3 months ago. We've had, again, these tremendous storms that have affected the entire region here, the Tampa Bay area, but really in St. Petersburg and Pinellas County has been devastating. And there was so much talk about infrastructure, how to, sewer, stormwater improvements. We saw the situation with the water in St. Petersburg, where people could not use their water for several days after both of these storms at different times. And protecting the future and livelihood specifically of St. Petersburg. Now, you mentioned the Vince Nowicki Convention Center. I know that's been discussion over the years in St. Petersburg,
right,
as they try to compete with Tampa. Tampa, of course, has a very successful convention center here,
booked out several years already. So it's there's a clear need and a desire for that, and we have PI. You can have private jets go into PI.
Clearwater St. Petersburg Airport.
Correct. I mean, we got the Sunrunner, which I'm not a big fan of, but we already have it, so might as well put it to use. And if you have a convention center downtown, what better use of the Sunrunner? Actually put some riders actually on there to go downtown or to go to our beaches.
Why do you not like the Sunrunner?
I mean, it has terrible ridership and costs a lot of money that nobody really uses.
So have you talked to any folks?
I don't live in St. Pete, so I don't know, but I do see people on the Sunrunner a lot, and I've actually used it a couple of times. I just wonder if it's just fiscal consideration.
Yeah, I mean, about, if we want to get into PSTA, you have about roughly 7 routes that make up almost 70% of the ridership, and the PSTA is 93% government subsidized, and only about 7% of their actual revenue comes from ridership. So it's not really serving the public, and less than 1% of Pinellas County's population rides the bus. So it's public assets. We're taking away lanes for roads for everyone to use for less than 1% of the population to use.
And as I understand, is that chicken and egg syndrome? Like if the bus lines don't exist, there's never going to be ridership, right? If the infrastructure doesn't exist, more people are going to know that the bus is regular and routine.
For sure. They're in a coverage model, which is a lot of routes with really big buses versus it's been suggested they go to a core model, which is the routes that are used. Use smaller buses at a higher frequency to get people where they need to go faster. So I'm not about eliminating public transportation, but just make it more efficient and better for the people that use it.
Gotcha.
So back to the stadium here issue. In fact, let me just read something from Neil DeMouse. He writes from the blog Field of Schemes, which covers all these issues with stadium issues. He writes about what the county and city should go. Do they go ahead and talk about the city of St. Petersburg? I believe. Do they go ahead and repair a stadium that would, by the time it reopened in 2026, only have 2 years of life left? He says probably yes. The city is in line to get $25 million back from its insurance, and $30 million to get 2 years out of a stadium isn't awful. By comparison, the public is spending around $1 billion for a new stadium that will likely only be in use for around 30 years. So that's more than double the cost per year. He says, plus St. Petersburg Mayor Ken Welch noted the Rays lease on Tropicana Field says it is, quote, suspended. The stadium is unplayable for a year, which would mean it would be extended, as we say, through 2028, the new stadium not opening until 2029, in which case you're only talking about $10 million per season of use. A lot of people think that spending $55 million in the old stadium to pay for 2 years is ridiculous, though. I mean, again, I'm really seeing a lot of that in social media here. Do you have an opinion about that?
Yeah, I mean, I got lots of opinions. But
we're learning this.
Yeah, so $55 million for the stadium there is just, find me one city project in the last decade that's been on budget and on time in the city of St. Pete. I mean, I just saw on a post last night, you have the Manhattan Casino in, South St. Pete that had a leaking roof and a broken AC, and the city hasn't been able to fix that in 2 years. So what God's green earth do we think the city of St. Petersburg that goes over budget and over time on the pier? It took 10 years for them to build a 2-lane bridge from Shore Acres to Snell Isle. And what earth do we think that a contractor is going to get this bid and actually complete it on time and on budget? No one's talked about that because the city has a terrible track record of completing jobs.
So you're skeptical that it could even be done by the 2025 season?
Yeah, I mean, look at the Barack Obama Library in St. Pete, which is the main library. It's been closed for like 4 or 5 years. It was projected to take 1 to 2 years to do. I mean, it's, call it is what it is, but the current administration doesn't have a good track record of finishing projects when they say they're going to do it.
So again, and then in terms of we talked about the Rays are paying St. Bernard Field now to play in Tampa.
Yeah.
Do you think that Pinellas got screwed out of this right now in terms of where they're going to play for next year?
I mean, you tell me, Mitch, if you're going to get $1 million a year, or they're going and turning around and paying somebody else $15 million for 1 year, would you say they're getting screwed?
So do you talk to, I'm sure you do, right? Still regular citizens, voters right now about the sentiment here. I mean, again, I'm reflecting what I see on social media, and I know the algorithm. Sometimes I may be always seeing certain parts of the electorate, so I don't want to say that's where the whole public is on this. But this was contentious. That's a fact in terms of the public taxpayer commitment. Would you be okay at all, Vince Nowicki, for a less commitment, financial commitment, but still public monies going from Pinellas County for a new stadium?
Yeah, I mean, I really think we need to, which we haven't even gotten a report back from the Army Corps of Engineers to see the state of our beaches. So we don't know that. Again, I'd like to see a convention center, 1 million square feet.
I'm sorry, and you're saying from the Army Corps, what is this, post hurricanes? I mean,
correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So we don't know really the state of our beaches currently, which are a known fact, our largest economic driver for the county. So again, is this all about just for the love of baseball, the emotional aspect of it, or is this, talking about real, heads and beds, dollars, economic development, and our greatest ROI? So our greatest ROI, in my opinion, and I would say according to Visit St. Pete Clearwater, is our beaches. So I would be open to talking to the Rays or figuring something out, but I think they could come up with more money, and we have more priorities. It's like a kid that has holes in his shoes but wants a new Xbox.
I was going to ask you, during the course of the campaign or even after election, did anybody from the club reach out to you?
The Rays club?
Yeah.
Oh, no.
No, it's a cold war there.
I mean, they didn't even know, the county commission yesterday didn't even know in their workshop that the Rays were playing in Tampa. I knew because I heard from St. Pete City Council members that they got calls the day before, but I can't talk to my colleagues on the commission because sunshine laws, and then I'm not elected, so I don't have I can't talk in the workshop.
Yeah.
So here they are talking about it, but yet people are writing literally like as they're in the meeting, saying that they're playing in Tampa. So the county commission, Barry Burton even said, "Oh, I talked to the Rays yesterday, and they have nothing to report."
Wow.
So they had talked to the Rays a day before the announcement.
Correct. And the Rays didn't tell them they were playing in Tampa.
Again, our guest is Vince Nowicki. He's the newly elected county commissioner, one of 2 new county commissioners in Pinellas County, who elected last week. And Vince, and you mentioned, we'll talk about the beaches again for a moment, because this is another thing I thought about too, in terms of and maybe you can give me the straight answer here, or the best that you know, and that is about tourism, right? We know that many ways that the county commission was able to sell the tax was, this is not coming out of the homeowners of Pinellas County. This is a tourism tax, a bed tax.
Right.
So folks who recreate here in Pinellas County because of the great beaches, that's where the money's coming from. So it won't really hurt the community here. My question is, after the storms, is what's the nature of our tourism going to be going forward? I've heard contradictory information. I get where the beaches want to tell people, hey, we're back to business. Business is normal now. You can come out. You can take your vacations out here. I haven't been out in Treasure Island or that area for a few weeks. I was out there initially, when the storms happened, and so I know there's maybe a conflicting message here. And
right.
the bigger question about this is those revenues that you're expecting, to get in the next year or so,
right.
because of bookings at motels, what have you, that can't be the same now. The calculus is different now.
Well, when I met with staff on Tuesday, I was getting shuffled from, department to department and trying to get updates on things as newly elected. They said, oh, well, these are the rosy numbers for, the bed tax revenue. And I was like, is it really good to be going off of rosy projections after the hurricanes? Oh, well, yeah, like no problem. Everything's good. And so that's just not, my mindset.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I've, been on the beaches, have a lot of friends that live on the beach, houses, flooded, destroyed. I mean, Don Cesar's not open. I mean, there's a lot of hotels that aren't still open. Well, for people to come take their vacations here. And so I think the business, the industry is trying to, craft the narrative like, oh yeah, we're good, come on down. And then you get here and there's, debris piled up everywhere. But so I think it's, some beaches and hotels are open and you just got to do, research. But I definitely don't think we should be going off of rosy projections.
We've got a couple of notes, people writing in. Cherry writes in, why did the city of St. Petersburg keep up on repairs on the Trop? The roof was 10 years overdue on getting redone. That is true, right?
Yeah.
I have a totally dumb question about this roof.
Yeah.
Why? So the stadium is structurally intact. Why can't they play baseball without a roof? I mean, this is what they're doing in Tampa.
Right,
probably like insurance, safety, HVAC.
Yeah, but it doesn't make sense to me that material that has been now completely removed from the top of the thing would have anything to do at all with the safety of people inside that stadium. Why not play there?
Well, there's no drainage, right? So it's like a roof on a house. If it blows off,
you're not going to have people in there, during the games anyways, right? They would be postponed for rain.
Right, but water would just like there's no like drainage in the concrete or anything like that. So like in the stands,
don't they spray off those bleachers after every game? Pressure water.
People sitting in them.
I don't think so. No.
By the way, somebody I saw on Facebook yesterday when the news about the race playing at Steinbrenner Field wrote, apparently the surface of the sun wasn't available for the games. I mean, we're talking the fact, I think that the Times had an article, Colleen Wright said roughly, I think 4 or 5 of these for the team that plays at Steinbrenner Field.
The Tampa Tar
the Class A, Yankees, right? They have about 5 games a year that are rained out for sure, and many more, I'm sure, are delayed. And if you want to go out there in July and sit out there for 3 hours, I mean, go for it.
I mean, you got to talk to Marlins fans about that.
People going
Well, they have a dome now.
Are they going to fill up that stadium? I mean, it's more than 11,000 seats. Are people in Tampa getting excited about a year of baseball over here?
I think anecdotally, when you talk to people in Tampa, I talked with Mario Nunez yesterday, and he was obviously super hyped. I think it'd be a disappointment if the games don't sell out, and it would kind of, where's Ken Hagan at right now? Ken Hagan's probably doing backflips. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. But I guess what's sad about it is now we just keep talking about Tampa and the Rays. Then you have all these people in Pinellas County and St. Petersburg. Let's say they do love baseball on an emotional level. I mean, how are they feeling? It's just, I don't know. Mitch, you love baseball.
Yeah,
so.
long-time St. Pete fans who used to walk to the stadium. Are they in 2025 going to?
And then there's that element that you were talking about earlier with, MLB and how much money they're actually going to be able to make off of broadcasting now. They're paying people to broadcast their games. So who knows?
So again, I think we talked to this. Somebody wrote in, Vince, another person just said, somebody said, does your guest have a hard proposal? I don't know if you need to have that right this moment. It's one thing just to say, hold up on the $312 million, and then we go from there.
Right.
Or right? I mean, that's the vote. That's because that's what you guys are looking at voting on Tuesday.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure the seasoned politicians will prevail the day on Tuesday of kicking the can down the road.
Because you can theoretically you can do that.
Correct. Yeah. So I'm sure I have much trust in the seasoned career politicians that I work with and will soon to be my colleagues. The more tempered hand to wait to see what St. Pete does. Just so the county commission's not the bad guy.
Although Field of Scheme saying that Renee Flowers, who was in favor of the deal, now isn't quite sure yet.
Is that right?
But as Vince alluded, he doesn't know what's going to happen on Tuesday. So,
Well, that's.
but how much
intriguing.
longer can the county and the city actually kick the can down the
Till
road?
March
Because the
31st.
Rays always
They
kind of have said
Ray,
The clock
the-
is ticking.
Yeah,
always,
no, they have
right?
6 months.
it's
or
always
whatever.
been ticking, though, right?
No,
Like, for
but now
It's
that's
been
last
ticking
decade.
since I moved here in 2005.
Right, 2007.
Yeah.
I mean, 2007 was literally, I can remember the day. It was a CNN presidential debate at the in St. Petersburg. Mike Huckabee, Rudy Giuliani. It was a Republican debate, and that news broke that day of the Al Lang Field. That's where they were going to propose it. And it was kind of controversial then because they hadn't talked to anybody like publicly about it. It was all just dropped on the public. And if you recall, the backlash was tremendous because people said on the waterfront, no, that's kind of considered sacred in St. Petersburg. And they dropped that that idea very quickly. But that's where we started this thing 17 years ago, basically, this long saga. Well, Vince, we have a few more minutes before we move on to our next topic here. But yeah, so what else? Okay, so you got 4 years here on the commission here to do what you want to do in terms of make this a better community. What are your goals here?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to see Moffett come somewhere into Pinellas County. I thought that was a shame that St. Pete turned down Moffett to build an apartment building instead. So, I thought it was a travesty to lose, life-saving cancer research campus for an apartment building. So, I'd like to see Moffett and partner with Moffett somewhere in the county. I'd like to see just county services be a little bit better in the unincorporated areas like Wheelman and Palm Harbor. They get left out a lot, but they pay a lot of taxes. And so, they get a lot of neglected. I talked in one of our debates how, a lot of these unincorporated areas just have drain ditches. They don't really have curbs and sewers. But yet the city of Pompeii thousands of years ago had curbs and sewers, but yet we can't even get curbs and sewers here in Pinellas County.
What are your thoughts about rebuilding on these areas, barrier islands, that, it seems like we're going to deal with this the rest of our lives,
right,
in terms of these major storms here?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to see, jetties all up and down our coastline. I think, we need to really make some long-term, big investments that really harden and make our beaches and our infrastructure more resilient for the long term. And I think that's something where the state of Florida, and hopefully with everyone in Trump's cabinet coming from Florida, hopefully we can get some federal money for jetties and to make things that would be really resilient and helping beach erosion.
Do you believe climate change is man-made here?
I haven't studied it enough to definitively say.
Dodge. Okay. Well, but to be fair, whether you answer that question or not, it's actually whatever we're going to call it, right? It's really, we've got these major storms that aren't going away. Seemingly every year we're going to have it, and this community is going to have to deal with that. And the government is going to have to respond to that.
For sure. I think like Isle Morada got wiped off the map almost 100 years ago, from a hurricane. So, I think if you got to look at it, as a whole,
but it's really intense now. To be fair, we're living.
We're 7 inches higher in the bay.
We never had that before.
That alone,
yeah,
7 inches in 30 years.
Yeah, I haven't.
Okay.
I'm not a scientist.
No.
So.
Okay. All right. You're admitting that. All right. I think we're going to move on. Vince, thank you so much for coming in here.
Of course.
Again, Vince Nowicki, newly elected Pinellas County Commissioner. He gets sworn in on Monday. He has his big vote on Tuesday, if they in fact do vote on this, about issuing the bonds for the Tropicana Field. The saga will continue on, and we'll be watching it. So, Vince Nowicki, thank you so much for coming on to The Skinny.
Thanks for having me, Mitch. Thank you.
All right. We're going to pivot now, and we don't know. I want to make sure to bring up our guest here. Is that Tomas here? Is on here?
I'm here.
Okay, great. So, now I know where to go here. Okay, so we're now going to segue now to talking about what happened not so much what happened in the election, because people have been talking about that or not talking about that. Thank you, Vince. But we're going to deal with the Florida Democratic Party. We're going to deal with the issues there, and gosh, they are formidable. It's been 10 days now, as we said earlier, since the shellacking nationally the Democratic Party suffered from, and certainly in Florida. We've been reading numerous op-eds and screeds on social media about where the party went wrong in alienating the public from voting for their candidates. Here in Florida, there was an opinion piece written this week by Miami filmmaker and now former Democrat Billy Corbin, where he announced that he was leaving both the Miami-Dade County Democratic Party and the Florida Democratic Party. Will now become an NPA, a non-party affiliated voter. But Tomas Kennedy, our guest right now, got there first. Tomas is an activist from Miami who has worked for organizations like the Service Employees International Union, the New Florida Majority, the political director, I believe still is, at the Florida Immigrant Coalition. He was also a member of Bernie Sanders' 2020 presidential campaign, and he had been a Florida member of the Democratic National Committee until he left the party earlier this year. Good morning, Tomas, officially. Hi there, Tomas.
Hey, good morning. Thank you for the invite.
Great to have you here with us. So first thing I want to ask you before we talk about why you left the party, Nikki Fried, party chair, she wrote an op-ed in the Miami Herald yesterday, talked about basically, what went wrong 10 days ago. And she also announced she's running for re-election. Your thoughts?
I mean, look, when you fail that badly at your job, when your performance is so poor, and when your strategic thinking is so deficient, I mean, I just think you need to be replaced. I mean, they basically, and it led to really bad strategic thinking and resource allocation, because they were investing resources in a statewide races that they could not win, when we had very marginal competitive races in Orlando, right? Like the Nate Douglas race against Placencia, the Paula Stark race that were, all those races, I think 3 of them that were decided by less than a percentage point, that perhaps if they would have been more strategic, they could have eked out a wins. And then there's, you mentioned Billy Corbin. There's he calls it the crash test Democrats, right? And it was this strategy of running a Democrat in every legislative district in the state, right? And what that causes is, first of all, a spreading thin the already limited resources that the party had among no-shot candidates. You're juicing up turnout in red districts that perhaps otherwise, people wouldn't have turned out or wouldn't have been so eager to vote because they were non-competitive. And, I think it was a Tallahassee Democrat that had just an incredible piece that highlighted the unseriousness of the strategy, where you had people that were residing in Tallahassee, running in races in Miami-Dade, not doing interviews, not fundraising. It just highlights the smoke and mirrors approach of the Florida Democratic Party this cycle. And now you have, Nikki Fried and other folks in leadership coming out and saying, well, we actually always knew that Florida wasn't in play. I mean, they're quoted in the media saying, we always knew that Florida wasn't in play. Well, they were gaslighting all of us. Some of us knew better, but a lot of people, they don't follow politics as maniacally as we do.
Right.
They believe this stuff. They were gaslighting people. To me, we need new leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, we're talking to Tomas Kennedy from Miami area, a former Democratic member of the Democratic National Committee who quit the party. Now, let's get over that because, again, I'm seeing a lot. Billy Corbin's a high-profile name, but I've seen other people on social media this week say they're leaving the party to go NPA. They have their own reasons for doing this. Some people say you should stay and fight. If you're a Democrat, have you? I think you had an issue with the issue on the whole Israel Hamas situation. Is that correct? Tell me about why you left the party.
Yeah, so I wrote an op-ed on The Intercept about it. If folks are more interested in my thoughts. But basically, I left in January because of the genocide in Gaza and the handling of that war by the Biden administration. And particularly, I don't know if you remember at the time, but there was the Lankford-Murphy immigration border bill.
Yeah.
And, I'm an immigration activist.
Right.
I am an immigrant myself. It's a very, very important and close issue to me. And I remember the Lankford-Murphy bill at the time was being leveraged as an exchange for military aid for Ukraine, but also for Israel, right? And this is a bill that would have funded more war, created more refugees, more forced displacement of people, and the exchange for that military and war funding was restricting severely the asylum process in the United States, in violation, quite frankly, of international humanitarian law and replicating, implementing asylum restrictions that were first, architected by the Trump administration, that, by the way, were imposed by the Biden administration later via executive action, even stricter than what was in that Langford Murphy bill. So to me, I just couldn't rationalize. I did not want to be part of a body politic that, again, was in favor of creating more refugees, more misery, and more displacement while restricting the asylum process. That just did not make sense to me. Now, that doesn't mean that I think that the Republicans are better or that I'm, calling on people to vote for Trump or whatever. It's just that being a member of the DNC at that point, I did not feel represented in that body politic.
What is your prescription? If there's probably not one, obviously. I mean, the party, we have a situation where we literally more than 1 million now Republicans, registered Republicans here in Florida. You saw that last week in some of the results locally in Miami-Dade County. We saw that here in Hillsborough County. And by the way, Hillsborough County Party Chair Ione Townsend, who was going to run for re-election, announced yesterday she will not run for re-election. So, that's what we have coming up here. And, again, in Hillsborough County alone, there was more than 73,000 more Democrats than Republicans before the 2020 election. Currently, it's about 3,000, the difference. Democrats still have a barely edge there. So we are seeing on a mass scale, of course, and I know, Tomas, you've been around for a while down there, and we've seen the different party chairs. Manny Diaz, of course, was the last one before Freed came in, and it seems to be a cycle every 2 years. They leave, basically, and the party, nothing gets better. This is a party that lost agonizingly close one-point elections 10 years ago, specifically Rick Scott elections, when they had a huge hundreds of thousands of more registered party members than the Republicans did. So there is a lot that has to happen here. But where would you start out at?
You're talking about
the party itself.
The party?
Yeah, so Nikki Fried, say she goes. I mean, whomever the next person is going to be, what's their strategy going to have to be to get this thing to a little bit in better shape?
Well, you mentioned that I was in the Bernie campaign, and my former boss there, Claire Sandberg, who I think is a brilliant, campaign operative. She tweeted something that I think was, she's not the first person to say it, but it was a good reminder to political operatives across the country that tactics don't matter if the voters ain't buying what you're selling, right? And for the Florida Democratic Party, this quote doesn't even apply because the voters aren't buying what they're selling, and there's no tactics, right? I mean, Nikki Fried was going out on with Forrest Saunders on TV yesterday saying, from now on, we're really going to focus on voter registration moving forward. Well, what were we doing this whole time, right? But you also mentioned my friend Billy Corbin. Billy always harps about how the Florida Democratic Party brand is dead and buried, right, in this state. I mean, the brand is so toxic. So obviously, the party needs to create programs to register voters year-round, right? To do the early vote chase, to do the vote by mail enrollment, to do the vote by mail chase when it's time to do that, to do the community engagement year-round, to do the financial literacy classes and the civics classes and, the services, blah, 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 all the things, that it's become a cliche almost that, you hear Democrats, year-round engagement. They never do it, but obviously it needs to be done. But really what they need to be doing is fixing their brand. They have become, and I'll say it flippantly, cringe. You know what I mean? They become a cringe party that is alienating and out of step with the zeitgeist, the political zeitgeist of your average Floridian, right? And, I don't know if you know Kartik Krishnaiyer, but, he's like from the Florida's Voice, and he always talks about this. Florida is a strangely, populist state, right? And I think, if we go back to the politics of, I don't want to go too cliche, but the second Bill of Rights with FDR, but also people like Bob Graham and Reuben Askew, right? I mean, such a great governor and a North Star of what Florida politics can be if we focus on, curbing corporate influence and government integrity and transparency, and anti-corruption and, working class politics. I mean, we or the Obama 2012 campaign, right? That ran, again, a pretty populist working class campaign that also focused on lowering middle class tax cuts. We have the playbook. We just have to, Democrats have to employ it. And the last thing I'll say is the property insurance issue is such low-hanging fruit for Democrats. And I think what Democrats, struggled with in the past few years was that the Republicans were very good at displacing blame into the federal government, right, for anything that related to the economy, including housing issues and property insurance issues. Obviously, the Florida Republicans are not going to have that boogeyman to kick around anymore, right? They're not going to have Biden to kick around anymore. So maybe that opens a window for the Florida Democrats to message that issue a little better and hang it around their neck. But again, tactics don't matter if the voters aren't buying what you're selling. And the Florida Democrats don't have tactics, and they're not selling anything.
Well, it occurs to me that it also may have to do with how much you're spending on getting the message to the voters. In 2020, the Biden campaign spent $50 million in Florida compared to $5 million from the Harris campaign this year, and that's according to reporting by the Times. $50 million in 2020, $5 million this year. I think the results of these races sort of reflect that remarkably well.
Sure, but I mean, I'm sad that they're not investing in Florida because I want Florida to get better. But, if you're like a cold, calculating political operative in D.C. and you look at the chessboard and your goal is to get 270 electoral votes and you have a limited amount of money, which, by the way, obviously the Harris campaign mismanaged a lot of money. That's another story that, I'm not qualified or have the knowledge to get into, but it's obvious that they did. But regardless, if your goal is to get to 270 electoral college votes, Florida is not where you're going to dump a whole lot of money in, considering, the electoral prospects of swing states. So as a Florida Democratic Party leader, you need to acknowledge that, plan accordingly, be surgical, and maybe not spend a year saying Florida's in play,
right,
we're going to win.
Right.
Their whole strategy hinged on, hey, the other guys, the other party's voters, the Republicans, are actually going to vote for us. That's idiotic, frankly. That's a bad strategy.
Again, we're speaking with former DNC member from Miami, Tomas Kennedy. Tomas, an activist in the area, now an NPA voter, but cares very much about the Democratic Party here in Florida and nationally. And let's go back. We talked about you worked for Bernie Sanders in 2020. Bernie had a statement right after the election that has been quoted often, actually, as, again, Democrats look everywhere now to try to pick up the pieces here. He wrote, I'll just read the first paragraph or so. He writes, quote, "It should come as no great surprise that a Democratic Party which has abandoned working class people would find that the working class has abandoned them. First it was the white working class, and now it's Latino and black workers as well. While the Democratic leadership defends the status quo, the American people are angry and want change, and they're right." He says, go on, one more paragraph here. "Today, while the very rich are doing phenomenally well, 60% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck, and we have more income and wealth inequality than ever before. Unbelievably, real inflation accounted for weekly wages for the average American worker are actually lower now than they were 50 years ago." And Tomas, I certainly saw this for the last year, actually, way before the election, this concern about the Democrats no longer being the working class party. And, we saw this. I mean, obviously, Donald Trump did better with virtually every demographic throughout the country in comparison to 2020 with Joe Biden voters. But this whole working class issue is a concern now. As Bernie Sanders mentions, it's no longer the white working class, which certainly Democrats have not gotten that vote for a while. The margins have increased, the deficit there. And again, now you saw, I wrote a story yesterday. We've heard reports that the Latino vote was as much as nationally as 46%. There was a new exit poll that came out that said it was not as big, maybe 37%, but nevertheless, a substantial contribution there. Yeah, and of course, you're down there in the belly of the beast when it comes to, of course, the term of a socialist that have hurt Democratic candidates, as we both know, for many, many election cycles down there. But about the working class issue and the Democrats' alienation from that, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so, a little book recommendation to you if you haven't read it and the listeners. There's a great book by Michael Kazin, who's a political scientist, called What It Took to Win. And it's a history of the Democratic Party since the Van Buren era. and it's just magnificently written and researched. I mean, it's just a great book, and it talks about the heyday of the Democratic Party from the the FDR era all the way into like the Great Society, of Lyndon B. Johnson, and it's sort of the decline of like the labor working class sort of second Bill of Rights oriented party into the corporate capture that started happening, during the Jimmy Carter era and accelerated, during the Bill Clinton era, right? And look, when it comes,
Sorry, what do you mean by the corporate capture?
The influence of Wall Street, of big money in politics, of special interest groups, that are aligned with corporate interests, like Third Way, for example. And I bring up this book because you can see sort of like a macro development of this trend, even within the Harris-Walz campaign, right? When the Harris-Walz campaign started, and I'm not saying that they would have won if they would have kept on this track, because obviously like the atmospherics and the political context was so stacked up against them. But when they started, I mean, they were aggressive, right? I mean, you had Walz going in on air, calling these like the opposition weird. They were talking about, price controls and going after price gouging and corporate greed. I mean, it was quite populist, and I was like, oh, interesting. This is kind of exciting. I was always kind of skeptical, but, I was like, this is perking my interest. And, even in the Biden campaign, I mean, they've done some great work on antitrust and corporate greed measures, particularly, Leah Khan and those folks.
Yeah.
But as the Harris campaign progressed, they brought in, the old school DNC consultants and Democratic Party bigwigs and the Biden campaign people, and they adopted, right? They adopted the aggressive. They ditched the aggressive posture. All of a sudden, they're like, well, we can't call them weird anymore.
That's fascinating. There was this shift. There was a shift, like a noticeable shift you're identifying in this campaign.
And they brought in Tony West, Kamala Harris's brother-in-law, who is one of the chief lobbyists for Uber. You know what I mean? To sort of rein in the populist economic talk. And all of a sudden, Mark Cuban was in CNBC, acting like a campaign surrogate after, campaigning with Kamala Harris, telling folks live on CNBC, don't worry, they're not actually going to raise taxes on us, the billionaires and the very rich. That's just campaign talk. And of course, the Liz Cheney, campaigning, which Liz Cheney is toxic to Democrats, but particularly Republicans. And the strategy shows that she was, right? So I think the campaign was confused. And again, it was indicative of this sort of tendency that the Democrats have, that they're not comfortable with their FDR working class roots. And it's regrettable, right?
Was that an effort to like go specifically at that sliver of voters who were undecided and presumed to be in the middle?
Which
that shift in the campaign, the reining in of the accountability talk, the scaling back of the talk about the genocide in Gaza, et cetera.
Yeah, I mean, I think so, right? But specifically on the economy, I mean, I think it was just a complete failure to read the mood of the moment, right? I mean, this whole, to put it more simply, this whole "we're the joyful" campaign, right? This is a campaign of joy. The country's not feeling joyful, Mitch. Like, the country's feeling angry. You know what I mean? Like, I used to rent an apartment here in Coral Gables, which is, like a nice area of Miami, sure, but Coral Gables, Little Havana, in 2019, when I left that apartment, it was $1,200. That apartment now is close to $3,000 6 years later. You know what I mean? And we're seeing this trend across the country. Like, the country's not feeling joyful. The country's feeling angry. And they failed to recognize that.
Again, we're speaking with Tomas Kennedy.
What you just said is fascinating, because I heard that so much throughout this campaign. I said, continue to hear this today in Tampa. Can't afford to live here. Just hanging on by a thread. My rent has doubled in the past couple of years. I don't recall hearing a candidate talk about bringing rent down, stabilizing rent.
That was crazy. I actually tweeted about that at some point. I was like, it is insane that, neither of the two candidates, and really no one in Congress makes, housing reform or housing affordability an aggressive front and center flagship issue. I don't understand that
we
either.
We do hear that from Florida Democrats running for legislative seats, on Escamani and the like, but, they frankly don't have much power. Tomas, when we have you, I know you're work for immigrant rights. And I want to ask you in the last few minutes we have with you, because, of course, Donald Trump will become the next president officially in 80-something days. And we've heard from day one it's going to be, I don't know if it's quote-unquote mass deportations, but it's absolutely on the book that there's going to be deportations taking place. And we've heard maybe it's going to be, people with a criminal record initially. There's a lot of concern, as you well know, about this. What are your thoughts, and what do you think might happen? We've seen some pushback from some Democratic governors that they're not going to, agree to some of this, but nevertheless, and we saw a polling that the public is supportive. They think immigration was right up there with inflation, one of the top issues of this campaign. So what are you thinking about this right now?
Yeah, and I just want to add, Anna Escamani is wonderful. She outperformed Trump in her district by several points, and the Florida Democrats could learn a lot from her. On the issue of the mass deportations, I mean, look, to start out, I do want to say that there's going to be a lot of roadblocks to implement this policy. One is the budget and resources, right? I mean, they're going to have to hire a lot more agents and resource ICE and CBP and immigration enforcement substantially to carry this out. The other is constitutional roadblocks. And remember, there are a lot of mixed status families in the United States, around 22 million, and close to 1 million of them just in Florida. These are families that have an undocumented person or people with different immigration statuses, right? So that's going to be complicated in terms of separating those families. And then, something that's not being talked about is a lot of people that you're going to have to deport are people from Venezuela, Cuba, Nicaragua. These are geopolitical opponents of the United States, and they are not going to accept those deportation flights easy, right? And deportation flights can't land in a foreign country unless they are allowed to land by that foreign country, right? So we can expect, foreign policy jockeying negotiations from those countries if they want to carry out those deportations. And the Trump administration is promising 200,000 people deported every month. That's a lot of people. Mexico, right? Mexico, for all of López Obrador's, rhetoric about sovereignty and respect us and whatever, Mexico has for a long time done the job of southern border immigration enforcement for the United States. If the tariff policy that Trump is talking about is implemented against Mexican goods, which is, I think, our first or second socioeconomic trading partner, you can expect that Mexico is going to be like, you know what? Actually, no, we're not going to accept you kicking people across the U.S. southern border into northern Mexican territory anymore. You deal with those people, especially foreign nationals that are not Mexican. So there's a lot of roadblocks that prevent this scale of what Trump is promising. That being said, you can expect definitely workplace raids that we haven't seen in this country for a long time. I mean, Tom Homan was, on Hannity talking about this. You can expect, I think, some door knocks in people's homes, some home raids as well. And it's going to be difficult. Here in Florida, we actually saw less immigration enforcement during the Trump years than we did in blue states, because the nature of immigration enforcement has always been political. And they went after places like jurisdictions like New York City to make an example of them during the Trump administration more than they did in Miami. But that being said, we're going to keep working with elected officials at all local levels to try to push back against things like 287G agreements, which mandate the cooperation between federal immigration enforcement and local police departments. And it's going to be a lot of mutual aid work, right? Setting up networks of protection, of sanctuary, of warning, and just deep community organizing to protect people.
All right, we're going to leave it there. Tomas, we're going to leave it there. Thank you so much, Tomas Kennedy. Really appreciate your time here this morning here on The Skinny. That's going to be it. Thank you, Thomas. That's going to be it. Ben Montgomery. Ben, thank you.
Thanks, Mitch. Great job.
All right. Again, we want to thank Skip Scassi, being our engineer, Irene, taking the phone calls. We didn't get any today, actually. We're so engrossed with our guests here. Joel Schilke with Art in Your Ear is coming up next. You are listening to WNO Tampa, 88.5 FM. Thank you for listening. We'll see you and hear you next week.